Welcome to the Fighting on Film podcast, the podcast all about classic and obscure war movies, from the Normandy landings to the days of chivalry and swords. If it's been captured on film, we're going to try and cover it. I'm Robbie of RM Military History.
I'm Matthew Moss of Historical Firearms and the Armourer's Bench.
Grab your Uzis, prime your grenades, and lace up your combat boots. It's Mercenary Month on the Fighting on Film podcast.
Cry havoc and let loose the dogs of war. Welcome back to Fighting on Film. This week we are joined by a very special guest, good friend of mine, Mr. Vic Tuff, who is a small arms expert, historian, and international arms trade consultant. And he's going to be joining us today to discuss the dogs of war.
Thanks for joining us, Vic.
Pleasure. I've been trying to tout this to Matt for a while because it's of my era, well before you two guys were born. And it also has the distinction of having one of my favorite small arms in the Uzi, which I was trained in Israel on an armorer's course in 1984. So it was all fresh in my mind at the time. So I even brought one along to play with.
For the audio listener, Vic just held up an Uzi. Deactivated?
Oh, yes, definitely. Yes, it's an Uzi, as my friend Arnie would say. And it actually is it's a deactivated semi-automatic one.
Wow.
Probably one of the ones that we sold back in the 80s. So.
Wow.
Vic is a good friend of mine. I've known him for years, and we started the Armourer's Bench together back in 2017 now.
Yes.
Not only does he love a good war film, but he's also one of the most knowledgeable chaps I know when it comes to the Uzi. As Vic mentioned, it plays a bloody big part in this one, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It really does.
It's second only to the XM18, isn't it, really? But we'll get to that. We're getting ahead of ourselves, gents. So,
yes. Robbie,
do you want to run us through the plot?
Yeah, well, I thought first, kick off, when we've got them, we like to read them out on the show. So I found a review for The Dogs of War from Sunday, the 21st of December, which was a few days after release, from the Sunday Mirror in 1980. So the headline reads, Real Meat from the Dogs. The Dogs of War from Frederick Forsyth's novel works impressively at two levels. On the one hand, this meaty action film takes a hard look at the mercenaries who take huge risks and earn small fortunes fighting other people's wars. Played with chilling lack of emotion by Christopher Walken from The Deer Hunter, the film also probes the unscrupulous world of the international big business, prepared to overthrow governments in the interests of great goods and great profits.
Back in the days when reviews were just literally the synopsis of the film.
Pretty much.
They read it off the poster, and that's giving the plot away.
Well, whenever you watch old trailers, it always gives away all the good bits in the plot, doesn't it?
Christopher Walken gonna do a coup in Zangaro.
It's always like that. But yeah, the plot, you're thrown right in. South America, 1980, there's a Jeep hurtling through this sort of like makeshift airfield, unbeknown to the viewer, but it's Shannon and his mercenary crew. They eventually get to a Dakota and they fight their way onto this Dakota by like moving people out of the way, and they fly off, and that scene fades out, and then you get family drama for a bit. It's a very weird opening to a film, but it's very engaging.
Yeah, we cut to a christening, which is a bit jarring, and it kind of turns out that the christening is one of the guy that was the guy that was wounded in the Jeep, and it's his family, and he's going to be the godfather of the child, but then we never hear about that child or the family ever again.
Yeah, I think it's sort of just to get you in, isn't it? The guy's unimportant. It's like there's a couple of these Merc crew that you never sort of see again, because there was definitely like 5 or 6 lads in that Jeep. We see like 3 of them again.
Yeah, we see Ed O'Neill from like Married with Children and Modern Family.
Al Bundy.
Al Bundy. He pops up and you're like, oh, right, okay. Was he in the Jeep? Is he coming on the mission? No, he's not coming on the mission. Okay. Yeah. He never turns up again.
So odd.
Vic, you've read a little bit of the source material for the film, which is The Dogs of War by Frederick Forsyth.
Yeah, that's right. It goes into a lot more depth of that operation, which you see for about 5 minutes right at the beginning of the movie. Different timeline. It's broadly similar in that it's a failed mission to keep I think what must have been a UN enclave secure, and then they've just decided, right, that's it, up sticks, we're going to bugger off. And then they get into the aircraft and they're away. Shannon, who's the Christopher Walken character in the movie. In the book, he is Anglo-Irish.
Ah.
All of the other characters are either South African, German, French, and Belgian. So there's no Yanks in it whatsoever. But the movie has obviously been tailored to keep it within a reasonable time frame, because if you had done the book verbatim, it would have been an epic 6-hour-long film with an interval for ice cream and cigarettes in the middle that you would have never come back from, because you would have been bored to tears.
I think I almost was at some point during this film. I was crying out for some action. It ramps and it sort of builds and builds and builds. And initially, we get this whole section where Shannon is tasked initially to go out to this country called Zangaro, where a dictator called Kimber has seized power, and he's killing his own. You know, he's an absolute despot sort of thing. And this shady British businessman tasks Shannon to go out there and do some reconnaissance.
It's always a shady bloody businessman from Britain, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very wild geese, isn't it?
Yeah.
He poses himself, Shannon, as a wild bird photographer for a magazine. He gets to Zangaro, and there's a fantastic scene, and we'll probably talk about it in more depth later on. I'm a photographer, I'm here for work. The guy goes, photographer, eh? Brings him into the back room, and Shannon is fleeced of most of his possessions, but we're not sure if he actually meant it or not, you know, because he's a very clued up guy, this Shannon lad. He's very smart, he's with it.
I have a sneaking suspicion he knew he was going to get patted down.
And there's loads of troops everywhere. It doesn't look like the greatest place to be.
It's all going well for a while, isn't it?
Yeah, it's going fine. You know, he's having a laugh. He's riding around.
There's a weird bit in the jungle where the guy, like, sort of takes him into the jungle because he's nicked his car keys. So Shannon goes outside in the morning to go and do a bit of a recce. And, you know, the hotel owners organized him a Jeep. You know, he goes and gets into the Jeep and realizes the keys are gone. And there's a chap sat on the side of the hotel with his keys, and I think he then assumes that that's a guide. He allows this chap to, like, take him into the jungle. And he's speaking like fluent English at one point, and then as soon as he gets him into the jungle, it's just like he's just talking to himself in Zangaran. He sort of like gives him the slip, but then meets him again on the road and allows him to drive him back in. It's just an unusual, weird scene.
Shannon says to him, it's quite important line, because it comes up later on when he leaves, and it's when you learn that everyone's in cahoots. He says, in my jungle, you just be another arsehole to the guy, and he sort of looks at him like doesn't understand what he's saying. But obviously you can tell from the tone that it's not a nice thing. So he drives back. From that scene onwards, everything's not as it seems. As a viewer, you're like, oh, okay, is he being followed? Do they know who he is? Like, is he going to get out alive sort of thing? It becomes more like an espionage sort of flick for that initial part of the movie. It's a movie of two parts, definitely.
The interesting part about it is the prelude in the book puts an awful lot more meat on the bone and explains to you really why Endine wants Shannon to go to Zangaro. And it's basically that they've accidentally found a source of platinum because of a survey. And it's all hush-hush, keeping it low-key. And then he gets Endine to go out and get somebody to go in the country to see, you know, what the state of the leadership is. So he's not going there to do a recce for a coup. He's going there to do a recce to see how stable the government is. If the government was going to be there for any long time, then they could go in and try and do a deal. So the premise is slightly different, but it's broadly similar.
It's kind of hinted at in the film where, you know, when he comes back and he reports, he kind of says that I think it's Endine who asks him, is the country stable? And there's kind of an illusion there that they were thinking of maybe working with the government in power, but they knew already really that they wanted to do a coup.
The book's interesting and it fills in a lot of gaps that you don't necessarily get from the movie. It's more interesting to have that background. And of course, after watching it about 10, 20 times over the years, the plot tends to stick in your head a bit more. But it's interesting to see that they got rid of a lot of the meat in the center of the book and condensed it down into a manageable sort of build-up to the actual attack.
So the meat's the bit of them getting ready for the operation.
Yeah. Well, in the book, it's 460 odd pages. The battle at the end doesn't start till page 403. It's over in 20 pages.
Much like the film, it's probably about 20 minutes of action.
Yes.
I think the film's probably a bit more generous with the time it gives to the battle than even the book.
The battle actually is more dramatic than the book. The book, it's like, oh, they've run off, and a lot of the troops, Zangaran troops, just drop weapons and bugger off. In the film, the fight, they lose, but at the end of the day, the end is the same. But the end plot is a little different to what it is in the movie. I think the movie is actually better than the book.
Yeah,
I'll not spoil it.
that's fine. No, spoil away. So,
People know what they're getting into, I think, by now with us.
So to cut a long story short, we can get into some of the real meaty parts of this film through the Italian fave scenes. Shannon comes back and he's brutally beaten before he leaves. It all comes out that everyone's in cahoots, everyone's working for Kimber. You can't trust anyone there because it would just be impossible to have a coup locally because everyone's in his pocket. Everyone worships this man as a god. It's said a few times throughout the film. Kimber thinks he's a god.
Yeah.
And he's treated like one. Shannon sees the base that Kimber lives on because he's paranoid. He comes out and he's in these like white robes and he looks quite, godlike. So it sets it up quite well. So Shannon comes back and he's been brutally beaten. He's lost his confidence. His pride's been taken away from him. Walken's character of Shannon is more believable than, say, I don't know, I'm not picking on wild geese. It's just in my head. Like Faulkner, I don't believe that Richard Burton was a tough Merc, but because Shannon's youngish, I kind of believe that he could have been there. He could have served in Nam. He could have been Sog.
One of the scenes I like that sets up that sort of like backstory of his is, when he's gone to visit his doctor and he's looking at an X-ray. You've got numerous concussions. You have a compressed disc in your back, and he's very blunt with him. He says, you've probably knocked off a good few years off your life. You need to start, living your retirement now, sort of thing. So you wonder what the hell's he been through.
He says, the only disease with a D you've not got yet is dead.
Yeah, exactly. What a great line.
You're gonna keep using that line, Doc.
But it's interesting as well in the book that Shannon was never a professional soldier. He was a mercenary throughout. And he sort of started at the bottom by just ending up in a war zone and then getting involved with say shady characters or whatever. And he falls into the mercenary trade without having any real professional training.
Wow.
Which probably means that he sees more action than any regular soldier.
With the film, we kind of get the idea that he might have been with like Special Operations Group in Vietnam.
That's what I thought.
Well, I think it probably suits the market that it was aimed at, which was probably the US.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you got to remember, like 2 years before he was in, the big hit, The Deer Hunter.
Yeah.
Which is endured much better than I suppose Dogs of War has, in like the sort of like the popular consciousness.
The Vietnam War only ended 5 years before the film came out, so it would make sense for the viewing public of the movie. That would be the big war they sort of would reference in their own heads, possibly when they see that Jeep going through it. It's very Nam-like. The XM177s that they have, they're very Sog Nam, aren't they? In the iconography. But yeah, so Endine goes, but could you organize a mercenary force? And Chris was like, yeah, sure. Give me it can't be done, but give me like $100,000. No, he's dejected at this point, but they end up raising like $1 million or something to do this coup, just an obscene amount of money for like 1980 for a coup. The midpoint in the movie is them planning overthrowing Kimber. You get arms deals, men are found. It turns out Endine's going to try and install his own like puppet.
Colonel Bobby, yeah.
Played by George Harris, who was Captain Katanga in Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah.
Incredible. Yeah, and then you get this quite short and sweet little action scene at the end. And then the ending is Dr. Okoye, who's seen earlier in the film, tending to Shannon's wounds. And Shannon decides that he's going to instate this man as the new president of Zangaro. And he shoots Colonel Bobby.
Again, it's interesting. In the book, it explains this better. So there was Kimber, there was Bobby, and there was Okoye, who was a moderate. and then there was two others. They managed to scare off the two others, so they was left with Okoye, Bobby, and Kimber. And Kimber and Bobby made a pact that they would come together and throw Okoye into jail, which they did. And as soon as that happened, then Kimber turned on Bobby and exiled him. So that's why he's then got this grudge, and he will come back and replace Kimber. And Okoye, of course, is thrown into jail. That's how Shannon meets him, because he tends to his wounds. So that's the backstory, and that's why you now understand why Bobby is an exile, and he's going to be paid off by the British company, the mining company. So none of that is in the movie. So Endine is the bad guy who initiates everything, but in reality, he's only the puppet for the industry beyond him. So it's interesting to know those little nuances of it as well. It's the movie that you don't need to read the book. It also makes you think, well, why did they make the movie this way?
So I think that wraps up the plot, really. It ends with a famous line by Walken saying, "You're going to have to buy it all over again." He walks away, and the Mercs drive off, and it's the credits.
It's got to be the only time Mercs actually get the better hand, like the upper hand of their handler. Because normally they just double cross, like in Wild Geese and a couple of others. But here it's got to be like, it's the only time a Merc has turned the tables on the big company or the government that's hired them. And he lives to survive, and he drives off.
You've got to think about it. And if you look at it outside of the plot when it ends, they're marked men, because Endine survives. You've got to presume that he survives. And of course, he'll go back to his boss. And what's his boss going to do? Because his boss was expecting multi-billion-dollar profits out of this enterprise, which has now gone completely south. So where is Christopher Walken and his other guys that are left? Because Tom Berenger, he got dropped. So there's only the Belgian Frenchman, Michel. There's Derek, the ex-SAS guy. I think that's it.
I suppose that's a good point to jump in and run through some of the cast and crew on it. So it was directed by John Irvin, who had done a BBC adaptation just before this of Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. And later on, he's quite well known for having done Hamburger Hill in '87. Chris Walken, who had just come off the back of The Deer Hunter. And he'd done lots of like dramatic roles in like Annie Hall and stuff, been in stuff that we forget about now, or, we go, oh, yeah, of course he's in Annie Hall. Yeah.
He's one of those actors that's become a parody of themselves, a bit like De Niro now. We remember them for like the accent and the look, but we don't necessarily remember them for the good roles they've had.
Become their own character, hasn't he, really? I love him, though. I do love him.
His eccentricity, I think, now is bigger than him.
Definitely.
Then we got Tom Berenger, who we just mentioned, who, this is like 6 years before Platoon. We got Colin Blakely, who is in a supporting role as North, who is a journalist. He was in loads of stuff in the 70s, Young Winston, Murder on the Orient Express, Alfred the Great, loads of different things.
Lots of things.
Winston Schoner, who plays Dr. Okoye, who was famously in The Wild Geese. Then we've got George Harris, who we mentioned earlier as Colonel Bobby. Derek Goodwin as Paul Freeman. Jean-Francois Stevin as Michel Claude.
And there's a little cameo from, well, it's not really a cameo, but it's a very early role for Jim Broadbent, which is nice to see.
Yeah, he's the cameraman.
It's really nice to see him. Production-wise, it's released by United Artists in December of 1980. Bit of an odd one for a Christmas flick.
Definite Christmas movie.
Definite Christmas movie. Up there with Die Hard now, I think, in the FOF HQ world. Cinematography by none other than Jack Cardiff of Dark of the Sun fame. If you've listened to our Dark of the Sun episode, Jack Cardiff is a monumentally revered and well-respected cinematographer. And the cinematography in this film is just incredible at times. It's so well done.
The shot where there's a rat on some steps and it sort of like skedaddles, and that's the sign that the coup's about to begin. And
really good. Edited by Anthony Gibbs, who edited A Bridge Too Far, and that's our next episode coming out after this one. So there's a great little link there. Budget was $8 million, and it grossed, didn't gross at all, actually. It only made 5.4 million, so it was a bit of a flop at the time.
I never really know about those numbers, like whether they're accurate or not.
No, I mean, I take their word for it. But the thing is now, apparently you half what you get. So they only made about 2 million. So it would be a flop in today's world. But who knows? With DVD sales and video sales.
It's really hard to tell whether these things are like successes at the time or not. But yeah, 5.5 doesn't sound a lot, does it?
Back in the day, of course, there was no DVDs. There was only VHS or Betamax even. And I suspect that it was about 18 months to 2 years after the movie came out at cinemas before it even considered going to the tape. And of course, back in the day when you had places like Blockbuster, you would rent them before they would become available for sale. So I think the figures for that you're looking at what they gross, they're immediate. They're within the first 6 months of being released, which is not like it is now, where the merchandising and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
There is a big payback. There was none of that. None of that back in these days.
Do you remember it being? Was it a popular film on release?
Well, all the cadets at my unit went to see it. What killed it was the slowness in the middle, which, when you look back at it now, explains an awful lot. But it's interesting to note as well that in the US release is 12 minutes shorter than the international release, and it cuts out just about all of the Jo Beth Williams, the Shannon's ex-wife, in the middle of the movie, cuts all of that out. It has about a 10-second slip of her, and I've seen the US cut, and you think, well, what the hell was that? She was in Poltergeist, and you think, and then it's gone, and you think, wow, what was it about? Then you see the British release, the international release, and it fills in the hole. He meets up with her, they spend a night together, and then she doesn't like the fact he's a mercenary, so she disappears again.
Well, it's not super convincing, is it? They meet up, everything's quite pleasant for a while, and then, she realizes he hasn't changed, which, he never said he had. He's just sort of realized that he's back from the recce mission to Zangara, and he's been beaten. So he's probably thinking, oh well, I want to get out now. I can understand why they cut it, because it doesn't really add anything to the movie.
It doesn't go anywhere, does it? It's
it's probably for the trailer. Like, they wanted a scene where like Christopher Walken's kissing someone.
Possibly could be drawing on the success of Poltergeist getting her in.
Yeah.
So I think, chaps, that might bring us on to the alley tally, and I know it's going to be a good one this week.
It's time for Alley Tally on Fighting on Film.
So, Vic, every week what we do is we have the Alley Tally, where we discuss cool kit or equipment or anything in the movie that's especially like, oh, wow, that's cool. So, as the guest, please do go first. What is your alley pick for this week?
One of the ones that I liked, and I always thought it was cool, was the little bit on the boat when the Zangaran troops come on board with Ginger, who was obviously the sergeant major who's been training them. Derek, the ex-SAS guy, says, oh, they probably haven't seen anything newer than bolt-action Enfields. They're going to blow the bottom out of the boat with the Uzis. So anyway, they get given the Uzis, which of course is a mixture of Mac 10s and Uzis.
Some of them very interestingly mocked up to look like Uzis.
Exactly. So they cock the guns, and then they just spontaneously do walking fire over the target and obliterate it. And of course, then he gives them a Cuban cigar, and Derek, the ex-SAS guy, sort of smiles and says, oh, well, okay, yeah, you're good. And that was always cool. I like the bit with the XM-18s or Manville gas guns. They're supposed to be so cool and are so old technology.
Right, yeah.
Nobody had ever heard of them. They were such an obscure weapon from the 1930s that they can pass off as a modern state-of-the-art firearm.
I don't think I've ever seen them in a film before or since.
And you could easily just go, that's just a prop gun. Cool, they made a prop gun for the movie. And I bet most people that watched it did think that.
But when I saw the brochure, the little brochure page, it looked so convincing. You know, look like something out of a Jane's manual.
Oh, I know. Yeah. So Vic, you'll know all about this. The kind of sales material that you used to see, or you still see it. You go to a convention, you still see like companies handing out that kind of thing, and it's just a print off page of some photographs of a guy holding the gun and some stats, and it's like the world's best, that kind of thing.
Well, everything's always cutting edge.
Of course.
Everything is always, it's better than anything else. And you read through the brochures. There's one especially that I remember is by Giat for the FAMAS, the bullpup. And that was issued to the French in 1979, I think. This was for the civilian version in 222, not in 223. Everything about it was cutting edge, which fortunately was correct because it was one of the very first issued bullpup rifles. And it was true. But then you read other brochures on other stuff. And I've got one by Psionics for their suppressor range for the Mach 10 and Mach 11. When you see the inside layout, you think, well, it's just for the steel wool. But does it work? Yeah, okay, fair enough.
Cutting edge World War II tech there.
That's right, yes, yeah. So this blowback submachine gun that nobody else has designed in the world, well, we make a better one. It's a Sten gun with a different dress. It's interesting. But the one that the brochure that dummied up with the XM18, which is the Manville gas gun, is quite a good brochure.
It is, isn't it? I've got it in front of me. Just before we go on, I'll read you the first line. It says, the XM18ER E1R is an 18-round, 26mm projectile launcher. It represents the ultimate in assault technology. While being lightweight, it is able to launch 28 or 26, it's a bit difficult to make out from the screen cap I've got, projectiles within a 5-second period for a distance of 100 meters and beyond, giving one man the capability of launching smoke, gas, or explosive rounds. And it also provides the ability to launch high-impact flechette loads and other anti-personnel systems. Completely legit sounding like blurb there for any gun.
Does it actually say at the end, it's what we in the trade call a mixed fruit pudding?
Yeah.
It's what we in the trade call a mixed fruit pudding. You're like, oh God, okay.
Yes. It's interesting because in the movie, the ones that were supplied, it shows you him loading 26mm flare cartridges, which have all been fired.
Good eye. Damn, didn't notice that.
For the effects, they're all 12 gauge blanks.
Okay.
They made it in various different calibers, including 12 gauge. So the firing sequences move between showing a 26mm being loaded and a 12 gauge being fired.
That great shot of Berenger on the ship where he gets it out of its box and he turns that little key on the back of it and he's just woohoo, like shooting loads of rounds off. It's pretty good.
It's the sound effect, which is a ricochet played backwards. But every time that he fires it, and you think, it's great. It's really great.
I think it's a great sound effect. It sounded right, but I'm not a weapons expert, but.
Well, things you got to remember that things tend to go bang, then we, not we, then bang.
True.
But it's interesting to note as well that all of the Zangaran troops, most of them anyway, are carrying Australian manufactured L1A1s. Now, did Belize buy them from the Aussies?
Ooh.
Probably. Or did they get them given? I don't know.
They must have done.
But you would have thought that because we use it as a training ground, they would have been British L1A1s.
Yeah, imperial pattern rather than metric. Yeah.
In the credits, it says armament supplied by Special Effects Unlimited, and that's at a company based in LA, Hollywood.
Yeah.
So I wonder if...
Yeah, they're quite well known. They're like the American Bapti.
It's strange because I looked up that company to see what they had, if they had an inventory. And it seems that now that name is used by a company that does visual special effects. The Manville gas guns were interesting. I've only ever seen one for sale, and that was in, I think, Rock Island auctions in the States. Didn't seem to fetch much money because I think in reality, they're cheap, cheerful. But it's an interesting gun.
The design was patented in 1935, so it's an old design, and then it got picked up again by someone during the war, and then later it inspired the Hawk MM1.
Right.
And then apparently the myth goes that the Milcor was inspired by this after the guy who developed the Milcor saw Dogs of War. How true that is, I don't know.
Put that in a brochure. It's like, oh, the gun you saw in Dogs of War, reborn. You can totally see that in a brochure. So Matt, your alley pick this week.
First of all, shout out to Christopher Walken's flat, which every drawer has a handgun in.
So good.
Opens the fridge, Beretta 34. Opens a drawer, Smith & Wesson. Opens another drawer. It's another Beretta model 1934. He's just packing all over the show. And I think you noticed there was a small arms manual on top of the TV.
Yes.
Blue small arms manual. Yeah.
Smith's Small Arms of the World, 12th edition.
Amazing.
I think I've got that one somewhere.
Yeah, it's the color of the spine, you can tell.
I think my favorite thing out of the whole movie is when they're about to begin the coup. Christopher Walken has his Uzi, and he has a little night vision sight, which is way smaller than it should have been in 1980 because it's supposed to be like a starlight scope, but it's about maybe like 3 or 4 inches long. It's more like like just a standard sort of like telescopic sight. And he looks through it, and you get that classic sort of like film green with a little crosshair. You never see it again in the whole film. He just looks through it one time. And then he fits his over the barrel giant suppressor, which is quite clearly like modeled after one of those Ingram Mac 10 ones, Vic.
Psionics,
the big psionic chunky buggers. But there's no way that would have fitted just straight onto a flush barreled Uzi. But it does in the film, and that's kind of cool. And I think him and I don't know whether it's Derek or Berenger's character.
I thought it was Ginger.
But there's 2 of them, and he might have been Ginger, yeah.
It's Ginger, it's across the bridge with them, yeah.
Yeah, they go along the dock, and they take out like a guard post with them, and it's that's a really cool bit of kit. So that would be my pick, I think, this week.
Oh, great! I like the sound effect you get there till you get it through, like pew pew pew, do do do, like proper light.
It's better than the one that's in Codename Wild Geese, though. That was dire.
For me this week, I'm going to talk a little bit about the kit the guys are wearing. So I thought it was quite an interesting little mixture of kit. So the Mercenaries, Shannon's Mercenaries, mainly have US M56 pattern webbing, I think. You can tell by the sort of, I don't know how you say it, like sort of suspenders that you wear.
Yoke, yeah.
Yeah, that's it, the yoke, yeah. But very iconic little look there. And they seem to have either just some sort of generic American fatigues, or possibly I thought they might have had first or second pattern Vietnam era stuff at one stage. Kimber's men have DPM, which was really interesting, and that would be maybe the Belize element there. I thought that might be a little link to the British were in Belize, weren't they, at some stage? So
yeah.
But then there's other weird kit the Mercenaries have when they're putting some sustained fire down the barracks. One of the guys has a British paratrooper Sten bandolier for a split second, which was really odd. But the one thing for me this week that really it peeved me off, but it made me jump for joy when I saw it.
Let me guess.
There was a Bedford M series, but unfortunately it doesn't survive the film. As we know in these movies, Bedfords rarely survive these films, and it's an absolute wreck at the end. But it did help me identify it because you can see the chassis a lot better. But that's my alley pick this week. Some great little personal kit.
Shout out to the 72 Laws, the M72s.
But there's one other thing that I picked up on. Endine and Bobby fly in a Gazelle helicopter. But I wonder if this is Belize, and they got a little bit of help from British forces who were training there at the time. And you can see that the military insignia is painted over, but you can read the tail code, which is XZ322. That was demobbed from service some years ago and ended up being an instructional airframe. And it was actually auctioned off this month as a collector's airframe.
That's incredible.
It's ex-Army Air Corps.
Wow. Is it Freeman, the ex-SAS guy?
Yeah.
I like the way he wears his beret. Very interesting. But I also like it when he gets on the M60.
Yes.
It's because he just goes mad with it. And all of them do. But you get some nice little reload drills that he does as well. So the weapons handling was quite good, I thought, in this film.
They're pretty good at the reloads in this film, actually. I've come to think of it. So as Vic was mentioning earlier, you do see them reloading the XM18, the Manville, a couple of times. Like you see Christopher Walken like open up the back and he's pulling out spent and he's putting in fresh cartridges. So that's kind of cool.
I think
he also reloads his Uzi as well, doesn't he?
Yeah.
It's interesting in the book as well that they use they say they use Schweizers, of course, MP38s, MP40s, whatever. But that's what they use in the book, and they've only got 5 magazines apiece, so they've only got like 160 rounds. If you watch the movie, they probably squirt that off in the first minute of the action sequence. You don't see them carrying too many magazines. You could occasionally see the bandoliers. You see a few mag changes, but there's also some have the 24-round magazines, some have the 32s. So I'm surprised nobody had the L clip on the mags as well.
Oh, actually, you mentioned that they didn't have the L clip, but Derek did have a jungle mag.
Yes, we love a jungle mag on the pod.
Blinking, you miss it. I noticed it. I thought, jungle mag, nice.
Beautiful.
So you can just see where he's like taped them up.
Taped it up.
And it's
Love it. Love it.
But they've all gone to the Colonel Faulkner school of Uzi handling, where they don't need ammo.
That's right.
A lot of centre mass as well, which is always lovely to see. We love centre mass on this show. Sandy trained them well. Right.
Vic, fave scene, you go first. You're the guest.
Fave scene, I think probably my favourite scene, again, I'm going to harp back to it, is the bit when Hugh Carshai, who's the Rick of Casualty, who's the Zangaran officer, comes into the hotel to interrogate Shannon and to try and trip him up, because he says he's a naturalist, and he says that President Kimber is also interested in the natural wildlife. So he'd like you to tell me the name of the great crested grebe. And of course, you think, oh God, he's going to drop himself in this. If you had watched in when he was on the aircraft flying and he's reading a book on birds.
Oh, good eye. I didn't even spot that.
Yeah, but he's got notes written in it as well. But then he says, and he was going to turn away. He says, "Okay, for you," and then he quotes the Latin name for the bird,
the full Latin name,
and then he brings out another bird, and at this point, drink, and that to me is always the scene that it makes me smile, because and Colin Blakely says, "I don't want to drink, but a drink for my father." In that scene, I think that probably tickles my fancy as the best scene.
That's a great scene. That is one of my faves as well. It's just a nicely paced, and Walken's having fun with it.
Yeah,
and it's just like it's a good fuck you to the guy, and he's the guy. He's the only person you see in that raid at the end that you recognize. When he gets shot, because I think Walken gives him a burst when he walks into like the headquarters building.
He stares at him for like a split second. They sort of recognize each other. He's blasting him away. It's quite satisfying, like as a revenge, because obviously he's been so emasculated by being beaten. Like him being there, being able to sort of bring the fight to them. You see it written on his face, like in a lot of the scenes. Like, I do think as a redemption arc, it's probably one of the better ones in Merc films, actually.
Yeah, it's not bad at all.
Well, he also he hoses down Gabrielle Drake, who's one of the concubines of Kimber, but it's her reflection in a mirror, and then he sort of, you see him staring bug-eyed at her, and he's obviously wound right up, but he lets her off, and then she
bit of Jack Cardiff cinematography there.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah. She would have been covered with shards of glass because she's only standing 6 foot from the bloody mirror, but no, it looks good.
Yeah, it's good.
Robbie, what about you?
My favourite scene, I'll have a couple, but I'll rattle through them quick. So my first one will be when Walken's doing the planning of he's giving like a little pep talk, little speech before they all go into battle. And it's just the way he explains why they're there. I think for me, the payoff of the short action scene for me is like, it's merited. It feels more realistic than, say, Codename Wild Geese or lesser extent Dark of the Sun, because I thought that was realistic in places. Everything's been ramped up for this really sort of efficient military operation, the way they've planned it. They've done their due diligence with the weapons. They've really planned it out properly. That's how I felt, at least when I saw it. And then you get this sort of really cool little scene in the hull of the boat, and Walken says, "Tactics, fire support, we'll bring up the rear." But it's your fight. You got to do it. Like it was my awful walk in there, but it had to be done.
It's better than mine, I'll be honest.
Yeah. Kimber, kick his ass.
Kimber, kick his ass. And they're all like, way the lads, It's a proper like rousing little bit. But then it completely juxtaposes with the actual mission because the lads get really stuck in from like gear one. They're right in there, gunning people down. They're actually hooting and hollering, like firing off their weapons at nothing, like towards the end. That you can tell they're letting off some steam.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really interesting because their home life in the really short section, you learn that they're a bit upset with their home life. Oh, my wife's on my back. I've got my kids. You can just tell they want to be back.
Yeah,
there.
Tom Berenger's character is a real dick.
Yeah, he is.
It's like, now I don't have to now I don't have to see my wife get fat, because she's pregnant. I'm like, what?
If I had
Jesus,
to see her
Tom.
get fed, it'd ruin me, or something like that. And I'm like, fucking hell, Tom, like Christ, But they're all getting 100K. I mean, come on, that's life.
Yeah.
Set you up for life money in 1980. And then my other quick favorite scene is the welcome to Zangaro customs check, which I think is iconic. Obviously, I mentioned it earlier. Walken stopped. He comes in and he opens his case, and there's 2 packets of Lucky Strikes, Glenfiddich whiskey, I think.
Yeah.
He's got money from all over the world. So obviously, this Zangaran customs officer, his eyes are lighting up because he's thinking of exchange rates. He's thinking how much he could probably sell those Lucky Strikes off for. Glenfiddich's going to fetch a fair price. But it's just the way that he takes it all off him. He's like, okay, I'll take this. He's taking the money to me. I'll have a little bit more and have a little bit more. You have a little bit less, sort of thing. And then he's just like air custom tax. It's just really cool. It's believable as well. It gives the extra layer of authenticity. We all hear the horror stories of people being fleeced that, of countries they don't know very well and things like that. So it's just a funny scene, and it just sets you up for the sort of, okay, what's the deal here sort of thing.
It kind of establishes what Zangaras are going to be like, doesn't it?
I think it could actually be a UK customs training movie for Brexit. I could see that coming. Yeah,
perhaps. But it's a film, I think, full of very well shot and good scenes. I don't think there's any, some of it meanders at stages, but it never becomes boring.
Yeah, I just wish they were all like tied together a little bit more, cleanly, a little bit more paced, perhaps.
It doesn't flow. It can go dead end, and then it'll flow, then dead end again. For me, for what I do currently in the arms trade, it's interesting to see the aspect of it, and it reminds me of that time, was when I was initially introduced to the arms trade, and it did have that sort of feeling for it. And how can you put it, the rather sort of old and musty sort of offices, that was true, because the businesses have been well established years ago. Why waste money on and the profits on painting the office? Just leave it the way it is. It served us perfectly well for 30 years. It's true. It mentioned end user certificates, dangerous goods movements. All of it rings true. And in actual fact, it doesn't come across as shady. It comes across as, this is the way that business is done, and is the end user certificate is necessary. Whether it was particularly legal and the actual end user was the scribe one is another thing, but it's right. And that's, the book goes into that in spades, too much. And it's one of the reasons why the book was described as a handbook for mercenaries, because it describes exactly what they would have had to do. The movie shrinks it down into a manageable chunk, but you can still be left thinking, well, that took a long while to get there.
2 hours long. The coup starts at 1 hour 36.
Matt, favourite scene?
My favourite scene is a split between the scene where he's talking to the Canadian arms broker about the XM18. Oh, and of course the bit where he's Berenger is talking to the other import-export guy about the 9mm quad.
Oh, yes.
Which we haven't mentioned yet.
We forgot about
the infamous 9mm quad. Now, I was sat there thinking, what the hell is 9mm quad? So whenever I hear quad, I think quad-mounted anti-aircraft gun, because, that's what I would think about. And then 9mm, and I was thinking, that's way too small for any caliber of anti-aircraft gun. Did they mean 90mm, which would be way too big for a quad mount? And then Vic enlightened me. So, Vic, do you want to enlighten the listeners about what 9mm quad actually is?
Well, apparently when the movie came out and 9mm quad was mentioned, it caused quite a bit of controversy. Now, of course, there was no internet back then. You couldn't look it up really quickly. And the question would have hung out there for years, been probably discussed in Soldier of Fortune magazine, Guns Review, whatever. And
Countless pubs.
Exactly. But it turns out that the most plausible explanation, I'm not saying the most accurate, but plausible, is that 9mm quad is a round produced by Speer. When Speer used to make ammunition, not just components, that was a plus P plus round. So it's a higher than normal pressure round and then some, so that the velocity will be increased and the blowback pressure will be increased, which on a blowback submachine gun would guarantee reliability. So you wouldn't short stroke and get misfeeds, but you're going to give, it's something like an Uzi would be fine. But if you shot that ammunition in a handgun, you'd quickly wear it out or break it. A bit like British 1Z or 1Z and 2Z ammunition. 2Z was for submachine guns, but they only issued 2Z, so it went in the high powers and wore them out. So yeah, that is the most plausible explanation that I can find. Whether it's 100% accurate, I can't say, but it's a plus P plus round, not a round that, say, frangible would break into 4 pieces.
Yeah, I've seen that written, yeah.
I mean, there is frangible ammunition, and I've seen a round that has a bullet that has a crucifix form on the end. It's not cut, but it has a shape of a cross. But no.
We have all this hoo-ha about them getting, we've got to get 9mm quad. We, God damn it, we need this 9mm quad.
Gotta be 9mm quad ammunition.
And then when you see the cases of ammunition on the Spanish port being loaded, it's got M14 E1 rounds in, which is 20mm Vulcan cannon ammunition. So the tins are marked incorrectly. So, but ammo, it's green. So, use it.
It's all to throw off customs, isn't it? That's probably what it is.
It's for Christopher Walken's invisible 20mm Vulcan. That's what it's for.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Just in case they get aircraft support, we need this Vulcan cannon.
Just in case the XM18 isn't enough for them. But yeah, so my favorite scene is the bit where they are on the they've been inserted, they've fought their way through the docks, and then they've come to the swing bridge of death, and they can't get any further. Like, it must be the only military operation that's halted by a swing bridge. And Derek and a couple of the lads have to swim across and get the swing bridge turned around. Tell you what, if they put one of those M60s on that swing bridge, the coup would have just fizzled. At that. Yeah. They would have never gotten any further than that.
Yeah.
But you have to admire Derek that he can swim across and keep his berry dry.
It's regimental pride. That's what it is.
Well, this is it.
That the shape of that berry is quite something.
It's very unique.
I would love to know how he shaped that. Like, what did he put it in to shape it like that? Like, it's very American Special Forces, that shape, isn't it? Like,
having shipped many berries in my time, you wear them in the shower when you do it.
Okay.
Then you have to wear it until it dries out. That gives you a headache.
So yeah, I love the swing bridge scene, and then obviously the whole set piece is great. And they're just letting loose with those XM18s.
And they absolutely rinse an armoured car with the laws, don't they?
They do, yeah. That's a brilliant scene.
They just sit in front of it and form a line and actually obliterate the thing.
Yeah, Berenger hits it with the XM18 first, and that's not enough. That's not stopping this APC.
There's one little bit that I find totally unnecessary in the movie. What the hell are they bothering putting claymores down for?
Oh, yeah.
In the middle of the road.
Yeah, they got the laws, and the laws do the job on the APC.
Yeah,
but yeah, exactly. I noticed that, and I've completely forgotten about that until you mentioned it. Why are they putting claymores down that they don't use, and why are they in the middle of the road?
We brought them. Let's use them.
Yeah, that's the mindset. Yeah,
would have been funny if they hit one in the Jeep as they try to drive off at the end of the film. Oops.
suppose that brings us to final thoughts.
It does. I admit I had never seen The Dogs of War all the way through. I think I'd caught it maybe on a cable network when I was little, but because it said The Dogs of War and there was no war for a long period of time, I think I turned it off.
There's no dogs in this.
There's no puppers in this. Where are they?
Michelle has one. Michelle has one. It's in the back of the
yeah,
truck.
of course he does. Yeah, that's the
It
dog.
helps him with the cans.
That's the good boy. That's the dog of war in the film. Fair enough. But I actually really enjoyed it. I got written in my notes, thinking man's wild geese. And I don't mean that like it's some sort of high, concept thing, but it's just the fact that it goes through the reconnaissance, then you go through the planning, and then you get this short little sharp action at the end. I felt that everything paid off. I didn't feel wanting at the end. I actually thought it wrapped out pretty nicely. And I like the sort of ambiguity of them just driving off and leaving the country probably in a worse state than they found it in. I quite like that as an ending.
I know what you mean. It kind of feels like the Wild Geese compressed all of the prep down into that one meeting where they stood around smoking, and there's a little board up, and like they're pointing to the thing, and he goes, "Yeah, we're gonna need this and this, and don't worry about that bit there. We'll sort that out when we get there. It's going to be Hardy Kruger's crossbow, all that stuff." But with the Dogs of War, you kind of get all of the detail, and it's everything from them tracking down the weapons they need to getting the photographs that they need, to planning who the guys that are going to make up the bulk of the force are going to be. It goes into a lot more depth in that middle section than the Wild Geese does. So I know exactly what you mean.
I think for me, although I love the movie The Wild Geese, it's implausible by virtue of the fact that most of the guys in it should be drawing their pensions. The age span of the main players in Dogs of War is right.
That's very true.
It works better, gels better in your mind for realism because it's not far-fetched. Whereas Wild Geese, there's some aspects of Wild Geese you just think, yeah, this would be great as a comic. It's more plausible, and like you said, they're more fallible in it. You could see that it was entirely factual, being a story, but it just works. It works better because in a lot of ways they're fallible, whereas in Wild Geese they just do the implausible, but they do it well, and I think that's how it works. It's always been an interesting movie. If it's on, I'll stop, I'll watch it.
Quick question for you: which is more brutal, Roger Moore force feeding poisoned cocaine to someone, or Christopher Walken ramming glass down someone's throat?
Ooh, Walken with the glass for me. That was a lot more visceral.
Apparently, they cut some of that out.
Really?
Yeah, possibly.
What the actual torture bit?
No, just the apparently put more glass down his mouth.
Oh, okay.
And a bit of it was cut because it's a bit.
I
much.
think the worst aspect of that is actually the Victorian toilet. And where's the attendant?
He's giving him $5 to go to the pub.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, go and have a darker mild, mate. We'll come back in a bit. What more can you say on Dogs of War? I think it is timeless. Actually, I think it's really withheld the test of time. I think it's still a good film now. And if any of you FOF listeners haven't seen it, then now's the time.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I thought could have been paced a little tighter. Definitely.
Possibly.
There's some of Jack Cardiff's kind of cinematography magic going on in places, which is lovely to see. Quite well directed, but I mean, I think as Vic has mentioned, like the source material that they're drawing from probably clouded the screenwriters' sort of clarity on what they were going to include in the film.
Yeah.
So they needed to pace it, so there was some interest at the beginning, a little bit of that dark underbelly in London, where North gets killed, and there's they force feed his assassin with the glass, and then you get a little bit more of the sort of like the planning and than the execution, let's say. So possibly it could have been balanced a little bit better on pace, but still a pretty enjoyable movie. As I say, I do quite like any film that Christopher Walken's in, except for Balls of Fury.
Oh yes, yes.
Which was a train wreck.
That was a terrible film.
Even he couldn't save that one. Thanks so much for coming on, Vic.
No probs. If you hadn't had me on for the Dogs of War, I would have come around your house.
He would have done with his deactivated Uzi. Put the feelers on me. Scared me. Thanks so much for coming on, Vic. It's been great having you on.
Well, it's fine. My pleasure as well. I mean, like I say, if you hadn't had me on for the Dogs of War episode, I would have been very upset because it's always been a favorite. It has the link to the Uzi in it when I was in a specialist armorer trained in Israel on the Uzi. So I had a vested interest in getting on for it.
Exactly. There's a great photograph of you in Israel when you were on the armorer's course in your video on I think it's the Galil.
Yes.
It was on.
Yes. Yeah.
We'll have to get that on the Twitter, won't we? But thank you very much, Vic, for coming on. It's been fascinating talking firearms with you in the Alley Tally. Do be sure to check out Matt and Vic's work on the Armor's Bench channel if you haven't already. Do some cracking work over there. Follow us on Fighting on Film. Leave a like, a review, a comment, and whatever you're listening on. We love to hear from you. And we'll catch you again next week when we will be zipping up our Denison smocks, jumping out of a Dakota, and trying to take some bridges in Arnhem with A Bridge Too Far featuring the pub landlord himself, Al Murray. So we'll catch you then. Bye-bye, everybody.